Coming up on Arirang News, South Korean President Moon Jae-in, entering his third year in office, renews the pledges he's made to bring peace to the peninsula and to improve the lives of the South Korean people. Trade talks between the U.S. and China ended without a deal last week, but President Trump says the U.S. is where it wants to be. The talks will continue possibly between the leaders themselves at the G20 next month. And South Korea, meanwhile, is bracing for the impact of that trade war. Officials say Korea has the resources to weather it, but they're watching closely for signs of instability. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to our afternoon newscast. I'm Devin Whiting. Entering year 3 of his administration, President Moon Jae-in has renewed several of his key promises. 1, to bring lasting peace to the Korean peninsula. 2, to ensure fair opportunity. And lastly, to make a better country for all. He was speaking with his top aides in a weekly meeting where he said he is determined to usher in an era in which the Korean people can live better lives in an inclusive nation. He referred to what he called the new Korean Peninsula system, where peace between the two Koreas promotes economic development and vice versa.
평화가 더 확고하게 정착된 나라. 일을 하고 꿈을 펼칠 기회가 보장되며 노력한 만큼 정당한 결과를 얻을 수 있는 나라. 모두가 함께 잘 사는 나라로 나아갈 것입니다.
The president also called on politicians to do better, saying they can no longer use the division of the Korean peninsula for their ideologies. Today's meeting was broadcast live to all staffers at the presidential office, the third time such a meeting has been beamed live through the internal system since President Moon took office in May 2017. And the top office is again calling for a meeting with the 5 rival political parties to take care of pending issues. In an interview last week, President Moon stressed the need for a joint meeting to handle issues including the passage of an extra budget and the provision of food aid to North Korea. Here's the president's spokesperson echoing that call.
We hope that the meeting of party leaders expands the scope of the agenda enough to cover in-depth discussions on humanitarian aid to North Korea, as well as issues of national politics, eventually to give hope to the people of Korea.
The president and the floor leaders of the rival parties had reached an agreement in their meeting last year to hold such sessions every quarter, but none have taken place since the inaugural meeting last November. Now, despite the current stalemate in the denuclearization talks, Washington's top diplomat says completely denuclearizing the North once and for all is still one of the Trump administration's top goals in foreign policy. Kim Yo-sun reports.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has once again pledged not to follow the path of previous administrations when it comes to negotiations on North Korea's denuclearization. He explained that efforts by previous administrations failed and even led to the additional development of the regime's nuclear program. According to the State Department, Pompeo made the remarks during an address to the Claremont Institute on Sunday, celebrating the think tank's 40th anniversary. The top U.S. diplomat stressed that Washington's aim is to make sure the North Korean nuclear file does not have to be opened. He explained that this is in line with the Trump administration's goal of achieving the regime's complete denuclearization so the nuclear issue would not be brought up again. Pompeo also made it clear that Washington is determined to cooperate fully with South Korea and Japan while convincing Russia and China that the move is in the best interest of the international community. Such remarks are seen as an effort to differentiate the Trump administration from previous governments by opening the window for dialogue despite the regime's latest short-range missile launches, as well as the stalled talks between Pyongyang and Washington. Meanwhile, former U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates told CBS Face the Nation that he believes the North will never completely denuclearize. During the interview, which aired on Sunday, Gates said it would be difficult to make progress in denuclearization negotiations with Pyongyang, but stressed President Trump took a, quote, bold stroke to engage in dialogue with the regime. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, food shortages in North Korea have prompted the South Korean government to push ahead with plans to send the regime humanitarian food aid. But the North is not entirely happy about the idea. Cha Sang-mi explains.
Despite the regime's recent firings of short-range missiles, the South Korean government is still pushing forth ways to provide humanitarian food aid to the north. And to this, one of North Korea's propaganda websites, Beasley, on Sunday condemned the idea, blasting South Korea's attempt as rather condescending. It said it was deriding for the people of North Korea as South Korea is pushing aside the basic problems of the Inter-Korean Joint Declaration to instead talk about a few cases of insubstantial humanitarian aid, all while making it sound like the move will lead to huge progress in inter-Korean ties. It further criticized Seoul for being ill-mannered and deceitful to people who share their roots, citing South Korea's attempt to facilitate, quote, joke-like bartering or personal exchanges. The news outlet said that if South Korea was genuinely interested in developing inter-Korean relations, it should stick to the implementation of the agreed joint declaration on inter-Korean cooperation without being self-conscious of the United States. Although Mealy did not directly mention the food aid that's being reviewed by Seoul, analysts say the word humanitarian hints at the project. North Korea expert Dr. Shin Bum-chul says the North is putting out two different messages, expressing disgruntlement about Seoul's approach to influence denuclearization talks with humanitarian aid, and second, a message to refrain from discussion of North Korea's food shortages.
It's an expression of dissatisfaction with the South Korean government that blocked public attempts to change the method of inter-Korean dialogue or denuclearization talks, and publicizing the issue through humanitarian aid.
Responding to the criticism, South Korea's presidential office said it will remain cool-headed and carry on with its plan to send food aid as Mealy is not an outlet with public confidence, adding that the website did not directly target the food assistance for criticism. 차상미, Arirang News.
Now, with South Korea planning to give the North food, the executive director for the World Food Program, David Beasley, was set to discuss the issue Monday with South Korea's foreign affairs and unification ministers. Beasley is in Seoul for a forum on agricultural development, but the ministries have said that his sit-down with the ministers will mainly cover the WFP's recent report on how North Korea needs roughly 1.4 million tons of food aid. With President Trump's support, Seoul announced last week that it will start reviewing humanitarian food aid to the north. The French hostages who were kidnapped while on safari in West Africa have thanked the fallen soldiers and the French government for rescuing them last week in Burkina Faso. They also told reporters after returning home on Saturday that the travel guidelines issued by the French government should be fully respected.
We thank France, its army and intelligence services for its professionalism and its humanity. We hope that all this violence will stop to give way to a more brotherly world that will finally try to understand each other.
The South Korean woman who was also held with them arrived in France and is reportedly getting a health check under the protection of the French military. It took him almost 160 attempts, but South Korea's Kang Sung-hoon has finally bagged his first victory on the PGA Tour. Our Kang Hyung-woo tells us more.
South Korean golfer Kang Sung-hoon has won his first ever tournament on the PGA Tour since his debut in 2011. Kang closed with a 4-under 67 to finish at 23 under in the PGA AT&T Byron Nelson at Trinity Forest Golf Club in Texas on Sunday. The 31-year-old finished 2 strokes ahead of Americans Matt Every and Scott Piercy. Kang was tied with Every up until the 15th hole when Kang rolled in a 23-foot birdie putt to take the lead, and he held it from there. His win comes in the 159th PGA Tour star of his career. Kang becomes just the 6th South Korean to win a PGA title and the first South Korean to lift a PGA trophy since 2017. With Sunday's victory, Kang also walked off with $1.4 million in prize money. Kang Hyung-woo, Arirang News.
And in Major League Baseball, the Korean monster Ryu Hyun-jin has picked up his 5th win of the season for the LA Dodgers, allowing no runs over 8 innings against the Washington Nationals at Dodger Stadium. Ryu gave up only 1 hit all game and none in his first 7 innings as his team won 6-0. Ryu struck out 9 and threw a career-high 116 pitches. He's now pitched 24 scoreless innings in a row. Trade talks between the U.S. and China nearly ground to a halt this past week, but President Trump is defending his higher tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. Several chances coming up, though, for the two sides to try again for a deal. Moon Gun-young has this report.
U.S. President Donald Trump weighed in further on the state of trade negotiations, saying the U.S. was right where we want to be and poised to collect tens of billions of dollars in tariffs from China. That's a view at odds with his top economic advisor, who acknowledged earlier in the day that U.S. companies and consumers would also pay the tariff bill. In a fresh tweet Sunday, the American president said it was Beijing that broke the deal and then sought to renegotiate. He also refloated a plan from Friday to redirect money generated by tariffs to buy up U.S. agricultural products and, quote, distribute the food to starving people around the world. But earlier in the day, White House Economic Director Larry Kudlow conceded that American consumers will end up paying for the administration's tariffs on Chinese imports, contradicting Trump's claims that the Chinese will foot the bill. In his first interview since high-level talks between Chinese and American officials broke up Friday without a deal, Kudlow said that both sides will suffer from the growing trade war. He also said although no date has been set so far, China has invited U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin back to Beijing. And it's also likely that the leaders of the U.S. and China will meet in the next couple of weeks.
The talks will continue, and I will say this, there's a G20 meeting in Japan toward the end of June next month. The chances that President Trump and President Xi will get together at that meeting are probably pretty good.
The ongoing trade feud between the world's two biggest economies is roiling global markets and weighing on projections for growth. The Trump administration on May 10th boosted tariffs on $200 billion in Chinese goods to 25% from 10% and gave Beijing 1 month to strike a deal or face tariffs on all its exports to the United States. Moon Gun-young, Arirang News.
And eyes are also on how the renewed Washington-Beijing trade war would affect the South Korean economy. Ultimately, officials say Korea has the means to weather the impact, but they are keeping a close eye on it. Ko Jun-hee reports.
The trade war between the world's biggest economies has escalated after the U.S. more than doubled tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese imports last Friday, after talks in Washington failed to produce a breakthrough. To discuss the move's effect on the South Korean economy, Vice Minister of Economy and Finance Lee Ho-seung held a meeting on Monday in Seoul with economy-related officials. The meeting comes after Korean stocks plunged and the won sharply depreciated last week. The vice minister said Washington's decision will have a limited impact on the real economy because the higher tariffs will apply to new shipments from China starting May 10th, meaning no immediate effect. Because the two sides are still expressing a willingness to pursue negotiations, he emphasized there's no need for excessive pessimism. Although there's a possibility for volatility in the international financial market, the South Korean government believes it has a strong buffer to counteract external uncertainties such as its foreign exchange reserves of more than $400 billion. To minimize the negative effect of the trade spat, the ministry aims to hold frequent meetings with related groups such as the Trade Ministry and the Financial Services Commission. The Bank of Korea also held a meeting on Monday and vowed to closely monitor the situation. The central bank said stocks on Wall Street rebounded, and South Korea's credit default swap premium, which measures the risk of national bankruptcy, has dropped. Ko Jun-hee, Arirang News.
It's time now for a look at the markets on this Monday and a look ahead to the rest of the week. For that, I'm joined on the line by Dr. Hwang Se-eun, Research Fellow at the Korea Capital Market Institute. Thanks for coming on today, Dr. Hwang.
Good afternoon.
So the U.S.-China trade talks, they ended without a deal, but they left the door open to further talks. On Wall Street, stocks were up last Friday. Take us through the global markets on this Monday.
U.S. stocks staged a massive reversal Friday after President Donald Trump said conversations with China over trade will continue and his relationship with President Xi Jinping remains strong. Stocks hit session highs after Trump's late Friday tweet and closed near those levels. The president also noted that the trade talks with China were candid and constructive. While a Trump tweet pushed stocks higher into the close, it was an earlier tweet by the president that helped send the market to its low of the session. I continue to expect the two sides to reach a trade deal eventually, but this is unlikely to happen in the short term, as the trade war so far is not painful enough for either side. Asian shares slipped on Monday on growing uncertainty over whether the United States and China will be able to reach a deal to end their trade war. Japan's Nikkei average traded down 0.72% as of close, and China's Shanghai Composite dropped 1.31% so far.
Well, now, Korean shares down pretty sharply today because of those trade tensions. It's expected to hit Korea's economic growth, of course. To what extent do you see that happening, and what happened in the local market today?
Seoul stocks closed sharply lower Monday amid an apparently deepening trade conflict between the United States and China. The benchmark KOSPI lost 1.38%, while the Costa Composite dropped 1.91%. The sharp drop follows unprecedented trade friction between the world's two largest economies. The U.S. offensive led to Wall Street gains on Friday. However, most stocks suffered heavy losses in Seoul since last week. When we consider South Korea's heavy economic reliance on China, the domestic stock market is expected to experience elevated volatility for a while, depending on ups and downs in the negotiation process between the U.S. and China. I think China is not likely to give in quickly. This implies that the damage to China's economic growth will have strong impact on Korean economy along with Korean stock markets.
Well, this week, the Korean Finance Ministry is going to release its Green Book with some data on the economy, including jobs numbers for April. Including that, what should we be watching this week?
The Statistics Korea will release the April 2019 domestic employment report on this coming Wednesday. Recent employment indicators are sending out both positive and negative signals. In the March employment report, the employment rate was 60.4%, which was the new record high in March. In the April employment report, it is noteworthy that the number of employed workers will continue to rise above 200,000 for the second consecutive month. The Ministry of Strategy and Finance will release recent economic trends in May, which is known as a Green Book, on this coming Friday. In April, Korea Development Institute diagnosed Korean economy is falling slowly and steadily, and the Ministry of Strategy and Finance said that the downside risk to the economy is increasing. The Bank of Korea will release April Import-Export Price Index tomorrow. In March, the rise in export prices was the highest in 8 months due to the $1 exchange rate and the rise in crude oil prices.
All right, got it, Dr. Huang. That's where we'll have to leave it today. Thank you for coming on, as always. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you very much.
In other news, the president of Iran has admitted that his country is under unprecedented pressure, swamped by the weight of global sanctions. Those, he says, could lead to conditions as harsh or harsher than Iran has seen in decades. Hong Yu reports.
Iran's President Hassan Rouhani, who is under heavy domestic political pressure, has called for unity among Iran's political factions. He said he has great hope for the future and he believes Iran can move past its difficult conditions if the country stays united. According to President Rouhani, Iran could face harsher economic conditions than during the country's war with Iraq in the 1980s. As Iran faces tightening U.S. sanctions, Rouhani said on Saturday that his country was under pressure comparable to when Saddam Hussein's army invaded Iran in 1980. U.S. sanctions on Iran's energy, shipping, and financial sectors have hit oil exports and caused foreign investment to dry up. But with President Trump's new sanctions on Iran's industrial metals such as iron, steel, aluminum, and copper, the Iranian economy is expected to shrink even more, according to experts. The Trump administration also deployed an aircraft carrier bomber task force to the Middle East last week, claiming that it was a response to a possible threat to U.S. forces in the region by Iran. The pressure on Iran could increase even further unless the two sides negotiate a new deal. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
Relations between South Korea and Japan are at a low ebb right now, but Korean culture is big in Japan. Movies, music, you name it. Our Won Jung-hwan in Tokyo takes a look at how the Korean wave is enjoying another boom just across the East Sea.
In Japan, young people in their teens and 20s are leading the new Korean wave, a trend that experts are calling the third generation Hallyu. The first Korean boom was in the early 2000s when television dramas were a hit among middle-aged Japanese women. The second wave around 2010 saw Korean idol groups such as Girls' Generation gain popularity. And this current third boom is much broader in its scope, bringing in Korean food and other aspects of Korean culture. It is easy to spot these trends in Shinokobo, a Korean town in Tokyo. A line of young Japanese customers wait excitedly for their turn to try Korean dishes such as cheese 닭갈비, a spicy mix of chicken and vegetables. Stands dotting the main streets and back alleys around Shinokobo Station offer other dishes and street food like Korean-style hot dogs. Rather than worry about the politics between Seoul and Tokyo, these Hallyu fans just want to experience and enjoy Korean culture itself.
I don't know exactly as I haven't been to Korea yet, but I don't feel such tension between the two when I'm here in Japan.
And as well as consume Korean popular culture, some want to actively participate in the culture too. At this dance academy in Tokyo, around 20 Japanese kids learn K-pop dance routines, dreaming of becoming a K-pop star in the future. This 15-year-old who visited the studio to sign up for the first time says she decided to learn more as the dance moves are beautiful compared to others.
There are many friends in my class who like to dance along to K-pop songs during break times. I have signed up for only one class a week as I am a beginner, but I will come more often later.
Korean musicians such as Twice are regarded as a safe culture for all generations in Japan. And that is why parents give their permission for their kids to sign up for the classes. But it's just not those K-pop idol hopefuls who like to learn about the K-wave secret. These Japanese people are here to learn about the secret taste of Korea. This enthusiastic group are boiling soybeans and mashing them to make bricks called meju. 장담그기, a Korean traditional process of making fermented soybean paste or sauce, is now being passed down to regular Japanese citizens. From K-pop to traditional recipes, Korean traditional products are improving Japanese people's perceptions of South Korea. And with the latest Korean wave in Japan revolving around teens and young people, it is likely to keep gaining steam. Won Jung-hwan, Arirang News, Tokyo.
Nighttime pictures of North Korea suggest its economy might be in worse shape than previously thought. That's according to a private research company based in Vienna called World Data Lab, which analyzed light emissions to estimate that the North's annual GDP per person is around $1,400. That's far below South Korean researchers' estimates of over 2,000. World Data Lab says from 2013 to 2015, the amount of light emitted at night north of the DMZ fell 40%. The main reasons for the decline, apparently, heat waves and drought. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for being with us. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.